Mr. Speaker, I pray for leave to move this House for a second consideration stage on the bill Promotion of Proper Human Sexual Rights and Ghanaian Family Values 2021. Mr. Speaker, this application is not lame. I am fortified by Order 171 of the rules of this Honorable House, which provides, with your leave, Mr. Speaker, is titled Second Consideration of Bills 1711, where a member, Mr. Speaker, by the way, I'm relying on the new standing orders as approved, where a member intends to delete, amend, or introduce a provision in a bill which has passed through the consideration stage, the member may, immediately before a sponsor rises to move the motion for the third reading of the bill, move that the bill passes through a second consideration, either wholly or in respect of a particular part or part of the bill, or some proposed new clauses or new schedule. 2. Notice of this motion is not required, and if the motion is agreed to, the bill shall immediately pass through a second consideration stage. 3. Where the whole bill has been ordered to pass through a second consideration, the House shall go through the bill in the manner provided for in Order 170. So, Mr. Speaker, for my purpose, 1711 is applicable for the purpose of the motion. And Mr. Speaker, I shall move in terms of my supporting memorandum. Mr. Speaker, with your leave, I shall proceed. Mr. Speaker, the essence of this motion is to afford this August House the opportunity to thoroughly consider amendments I have proposed to the bill with a view of substituting community service for incarceration. The amendments presented in this bill are motivated by a strong conviction regarding the necessity of implementing a more rehabilitative strategy in our criminal justice system, specifically with regards to the issues it tackles. So, Speaker, the issue before us is behavioral, and it is my humble view that in dealing with behavioral matters, incarceration is not a solution. It makes the matter worse. Mr. Speaker, various law reforms have been proposed in respect of sentencing regime in our country. Mr. Speaker, various discourse lead to one point, that our court system should introduce a more humane, reformative, rehabilitative system where people who breach our laws, who sin against our legislation, would have an opportunity to reform and be reintegrated. Mr. Speaker, it is my contention that with all of these in mind, to jail a person for his sexuality or her sexuality would not be the solution in maintaining our Ghanaian family values and ensuring proper human sexual rights. Mr. Speaker, in the least, such individuals who get into our jails become worse off. Mr. Speaker, as a law student, in my final year at Makola, upon visiting in Sawom with my colleagues, it became clear that inmates were being sodomized. It became clear that people were rather getting deeper into that habit and that behavioral aspect of our culture that we dislike. So, Mr. Speaker, if today we are passing a law, I am for a law that promotes proper Ghanaian family values and sexuality. I am for it. However, I am against aspects of the law which will make that Ghanaian, that individual, worse off. Mr. Speaker, I am also aware that government is introducing a community sentence bill. This community sentence bill, Mr. Speaker, for the avoidance of doubt, the rule and anticipation is interpreted different. What I am saying is I'm stating that as a fact, because government has engaged stakeholders, and I have cited a draft bill which is called Community Sentence Bill. It's a further step from all the discussions within our judiciary circles, where a strong critique has been proffered against Act 30, where misdemeanor leads to custodial sentence. And our court system has shifted. And we are aware that, Mr. Speaker, we have actually passed the plea bargaining law. What was the plea bargaining law aiming at? It was aiming at dealing with situations where the state can get back its money. Though you've committed an offense, you have caused financial loss to the state, but if you are able to demonstrate that you have repented, you have regretted, or that you admit that you were wrong in such a decision, however, you have the means to refund or make available the funds, the court system allows you to pay back to the state without going to jail. Unlike previously where the hands of the courts were tied. Mr. Speaker, it is clear, and I need to emphasize that without reservation, that this motion does not stem from any opposition to the bill in and by itself, but conversely, I wholeheartedly endorse the guiding principles and goals that inform this legislation. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, like I said, and for emphasis, I strongly hold the conviction that the integration of community service as an alternative to incarceration will substantially bolster the efficacy and compassion of our judicial system. And Mr. Speaker, I associate myself wholly with the passion with which the movers of this motion, the sponsors of this motion with respect, have introduced in this bill. However, Mr. Speaker, I do contend that with all my experience at the bar, all that I've seen in society, incarceration will be counterproductive. We will not achieve the purpose. We will be worse off. This approach, Mr. Speaker, the non-custodial sentence approach, is consistent with global recognized standards and safeguards the dignity and rights of persons, all the while preserving the bill's integrity and purpose. Mr. Speaker, human rights are far right, but cultural values are equally far right. And I'm saying that if this House is inclined to my views, there is no way the efficacy of this bill will be defeated at all, because it's still a crime to engage in homosexuality. Someone promoting it in a manner that will destroy our cultural values will pay a price. But the argument here is that that price that the person must pay must not endanger that person. That price that the person must pay must not make him worse off. Mr. Speaker, let me relate to my very self. Mr. Speaker, growing up as a child, my stepdad was very strict. If you make a mistake, you will receive some lashes. And growing up as a child, the fear of being caned made me do the right thing. Or Even sometimes I would plead with my mom not to tell him that I got it wrong. But, Mr. Speaker, all of us in this chamber are aware that the little children we have today, especially our teenagers, if you introduce a cane, Mr. Speaker, you won't get a result. If you use the regimental system that our parents introduced us to, you won't get a result. You need to engage them. You need to talk to them. So, Mr. Speaker, the proposal I'm making, where apart from the community service, Mr. Speaker, I have detailed an aspect where we would introduce mandatory counseling, which would include a clinical psychologist, a chief, an imam or a member of the clergy, an influential person in society, an opinion leader, a social worker. Mr. Speaker, these have all been introduced as safeguards so that the purpose of the bill will not be defeated. I've introduced all of these as post-conviction safeguards. So I'm not saying that a person involved should be allowed to go away. Honorable B.T. Baba spent many years of his adult life as a public officer, a prisons officer. I know, he knows, the experiences he had at prisons. The reports are there, where people who get incarcerated get introduced to such orientation and get even worse off. Mr. Speaker, if this House endorses this non-custodial sentencing approach, specifically regard to the issue discussed in the bill, in the proposed legislation, we'll be making progress in confronting our legal system to the international obligations imposed upon us. Mr. Speaker, the country is not an island. Ghana is not sitting somewhere on its own without international integration and laws. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, if we say we want a much more dignified safeguard, where the society will be involved in reform, where society will be involved in rehabilitation, and Mr. Speaker, we know the state of our prisons. We know it is trite that the states of our prisons are not the best. So if my son, if your son, your niece, your nephew, your daughter, who for some reason gets involved in this and is arrested, is tried and convicted, Mr. Speaker, can any one member raise his hand, be bold as a Christian, as a Muslim, as a Buddhist, and say that I'm ready to see my daughter, a teenager, a 21-year-old daughter, a married daughter who for some reason may be caught into this work to go to jail? Mr. Speaker, I'm a Catholic Christian. I will not want to see my son, my daughter, my nephew, my niece, an uncle and auntie go to jail. I will not. If I'm an advocate at the court, on that day I will rise and say, my Lord, my Lord, my Lord, please consider a non-custodial sentence so that the family can play a role and discuss and say, our culture, as a country, we don't embrace this. If somebody is in the international arena, is coming in, we know that even if this country, you get it wrong, you have an opportunity to reform. Mr. Speaker, we cannot go the Ugandan way. It appears to me, should this House fail my invitation for us to proceed to second consideration stage, we may be going the Ugandan way. It is my humble position. I shall conclude, Mr. Speaker, by saying that if these amendments are considered, it will symbolize not just, Mr. Speaker, a critical look at the rights of individuals, but, Mr. Speaker, it will provide an opportunity for this House to be in addendum with the judiciary. Mr. Speaker, I have repeated time without number that the position of our judiciary is on a regime of non-custodial sentence. That is the position of our judiciary. And that is why it has become even very difficult for remand. The court will rather want to impose some other obligations on the accused to ensure his presence in court than to say that, well, go on remand. And Mr. Speaker, we are also aware the principle of disclosure, the reform in our criminal jurisprudence, where our courts no more allow the prosecution to keep evidence under his or her armpits and drop them as and when. Today, the court system says, put all the cards on the table. I dare say, Mr. Speaker, that will be retrogressive should we insist as a House on a third reading with these incarceration provisions in the bill.